Doing a case of 78.
Yeah.
They're on that up there. It's not bad.
Not all.
Don't even try.
What else is that?
You said you had no back. Why are you taking so You said you had no back, but instead you attacked. You got me out of the
Yeah, you can bring it.
All right, well, thank you for coming this evening. I'd like to say welcome to year 4 of Cold Case MHS, and our 3rd year of doing the public presentations. We really appreciate you coming this evening. There's a lot of people that I need to thank, a lot of people that our class need to thank. Unfortunately, there's so many that I couldn't go through them all. But I am going to hit those that are the important ones. One is the family and friends of the victims of these cases that we're working on. For them to be willing to speak to us, to give us information about their loved one, and to trust us with that information to be able to put it back out there is got to be really difficult, especially when you're talking about high school students and a teacher asking a lot of questions. So we really appreciate that, and we hope that we can honor their loved ones tonight. We want to thank the law enforcement and other professionals, podcasters, news people, coroners. We have a prosecutor that's coming one of these 2 days. And we really thank them because they've really supported us, even when sometimes they can't. They've given us a few things to work with to try to find information. We appreciate that. I want to thank our administration. They have been extremely supportive of us, even though it took me a little bit to get it going. I had to get some famous people to kind of help me along the way to get this to work. But they've been great the last couple of years, and I really appreciate their support. One person that I also want to thank is the person that was singing the song that you heard there, Alexa Dahl. She wrote and performed that song for us, so that will be our theme song for our podcast, and she's also going to be in the class next year, so I want to thank her for that. The last one, obviously, are the students. I really appreciate all that they have done. I know we've had our ups and downs along the way, had to push a few, maybe really hard, but we've made it through to this point. They have worked really hard, running into obstacles along the way that's been really difficult for some cases, but they did a good job of putting this together for this evening, and I really want to thank you guys for that in another great year. The goals of the class, for those people that don't know much about what we're doing, actually, Evan, who's here tonight, him and I were sitting in class one day talking about a cold case from, I think, the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. The next thing you know, we're working on a case together, and our case, we started communicating with police officers and coroners and friends and family, and we realized that we were learning so much. We thought that you told it that this would be a great way to get a real life experience for other students. So we decided that we were going to try to push this, and the goal is to teach students certain types of skills: collaboration, working with a team, communicating. One of the things I think we've lost in our society with cell phone and all that kind of stuff is the communication skills. And I wanted these students to be able to do that. And not a better way to do that than to have to call somebody that you have no relationship with and ask the right questions, get to know them, and learn from that. So that's one of the things that we really wanted to teach them. The other thing was empathy. Many of us have gone through tragic things in our life, but I don't think many of us have gone through what some of these family members have gone through. And not only do they go through it once, they go through it year by year. So when a high school student or a teacher call, sometimes I know that can be very difficult for family members to talk to us, but we really appreciate the fact that they do. And the last thing is, we wanted to get these stories back out. Many of these stories have gone cold. They've gone into a file cabinet somewhere very dark. And unfortunately, as other cases come in, they keep getting pushed further and further back. And our goal is to bring some light to those stories and hope that we can get something back out about those victims that people can remember. And maybe the right person will hear it and maybe go to the police and tell them something that they didn't know before. So that's kind of the goal of what the class is about. As we go along, you're going to hear them say things about people of interest. We call them people of interest because, one, we're not professionals, and two, we're not accusing anybody of committing these crimes. All we're saying is that for the information that we have, these are people that probably need to be talked to again. And again, maybe some of these people had nothing to do with it, or maybe they did. But the goal is we're trying to say, hey, maybe we need to look at them again. And we're not professionals, so we're hoping that the professionals will kind of run with it after we get it to them. Some of the names in these presentations have been changed, and the reason they've been changed, we want to try to keep the family members and other people involved in the case safe. We also don't want to wrongly accuse someone, so we changed the names of some of these so that their identity will be safe. After the presentation, anyone that's in here or anyone that's watching the live stream, if you have any information on any of these cases, please contact that local police department. We're going to have information at the end of each one of the presentations that has the police officers or the police departments that are working on it. Please give that information to them. Anything could be important. Okay. And then also, if you are not comfortable with that, you can contact us, and we'll make sure that information gets to that police department. We know that some people don't like to talk to the police, but if you can give that information to us, we'll make sure it gets passed on to them. We can be reached on social media. We can be reached on the internet. We do have a podcast called Cold Case MHS, Monsters and Demons. Please listen to it. If you have any information from listening to the podcast, please call us. We'll be glad to pass that on to the right people. A couple of side notes. If you have to use the restroom, when you go out to the store, you're going to go to the left and go all the way to the end of the hallway, and it'll be on your left. When you come back, all we ask is that if they're in the middle of a presentation, either come in really quietly if you can, or wait till they're finished and then come in. If you have to leave early, we ask the same thing. If you need to leave, can you wait until the end of the presentation and you can go off at that time. And again, we thank you for being here. We look forward to this all year long, and we hope that our presentations can honor the victims that we're talking about. And from there, we're getting started.
In July of 1981, tragedy struck when on the 22nd, a young girl named Joanne Heber went missing. Her body was found months later, badly decomposed, and it was clear that she had been murdered. Just a few months later, on September the 9th, Robin Durer left her house to go to the market just to get soda. she never came home. Her body was found in a quarry behind her backyard. Once again, she had been murdered. To this day, there are still far more questions than answers. And the true question is, who did this and why? In July of 1981, tragedy struck when on the 22nd, a young girl named Joanne Hebert went missing. Her body was found months later, badly decomposed, and it was clear that she had been.
Alright, apologies for that. We're still working out the kinks. So this is the case of Robin and Joanne Hebert, two girls who were murdered in the latter half of 1981. These are victims. Robin Durr was 19 when she was murdered, while Joanne was only 14. Joanne Hebert, on July 22nd of 1981, left her house after asking her mother if she wanted a soda from the market. She was seen biking to the market, and she never came back. She was found murdered a couple of months later. What's Joanne? Well, she was described as a frightened young girl. She was scared of school, of life, and the world around her. But her mother hoped that she would manage to outgrow that fear. But she never did. This is the events that we know happened. Around 3 p.m., Joanne left her house on her bike and headed off. At 5 p.m., she was still at the market and was seen talking to someone on the payphone, although we do not know who this person was or why Joanne was talking to them. 3 hours later, the store closed and an employee notices that Joanne's bike is still there, but there's no sign of Joanne. Interestingly enough, the bike went missing an unknown amount of time later. At 11 o'clock, Joanne's family decides to start searching for their daughter. She hasn't come home yet, and when they still can't find her at 2 a.m., they call the police. Joanne was found months later, September 29th, by a local squirrel hunter. It was in a wooded area. Her body was badly decomposed, and she had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head. This obviously leaves up a lot of questions. Obviously, who killed Joanne? Why did they kill Joanne? What happened to Joanne and her bike? Who was she talking to on the payphone? We do not have answers for those questions. There were several obstacles in picking up this case. The case is 40 years old. At this point, almost any witnesses or leads that would have existed are either dead or faulty memory or just long gone to begin with. Not to mention just how little information there is on Joanne's case that's open to the public. Almost all the information we have is either from a single police report or from less than trustworthy websites and news articles. In fact, it took us a month just to find that one picture of Joanne. That, and finally, on a lighter note, the case has been reopened. It was confirmed by the Union County coroner that Joanne's body has been exhumed and they are looking into the case, which is great news. However, it means that the police department is not going to give us any information because of this. So instead, the coroner suggested that we move on to a very similar case, Robin Durr. On the evening of September 9th, 1981, Robin Durr left her brother at the neighbor's house and set off to go to the local market. She never made it back home. Robin was the polar opposite of Joanne. She was described as your typical teenage girl, a social butterfly who thought that everyone was her friend. She was always lighthearted and had a warm and welcoming personality towards everyone. The timeline for this night is here. At 7 p.m. approximately, Robin left her brother at the neighbor's house and went off to the market. She was seen at the market around 7:30 buying soda and a candy bar, and another witness saw her bike away into the woods. However, when Robin's parents returned home, an unknown amount of time later, Robin still hadn't returned home. And so they obviously went and searched for their daughter, and at 11 o'clock, they still hadn't found her, so they called the police. Robin was found the next day by her father. Her body was found in the quarry behind their house. She too had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Once again, this raises a lot of questions, such as why did Robin leave her brother at the neighbor's house and head off to the market? At that time, it wasn't that uncommon to leave children on their own for certain amounts of time. So it led us to believe that Robin may have been trying to meet someone or go talk to someone. Otherwise, she would have just left her brother at home, ran to the market, and come right back. She wouldn't have left him at a neighbor's. Our second question is, did someone lure Robin into the woods? And did Robin know who killed her? Because Robin thought that everybody was her friend, that nobody would want to do her harm, and it would be easy to see someone putting on a friendly facade and luring her away from people or eyes. But we still don't have any answers for that either. The correlation between the case is somewhat obvious in a way. Both girls were killed in an extremely similar manner. Blunt force trauma to the head. Both girls were sexually assaulted, and their clothes were stacked near them in a very similar manner. The murder sites were only about a 30-minute drive from each other, which is pretty close when you all things considered. They were both found in a wooded area near railroad tracks, and they were killed within a very close time of each other. We also believe that if this is the work of the serial killer, there may have been a third victim, SNS Ducash. On June the 3rd, 1980, she was walking home from school but never made it there. Instead, she was abducted and dragged into a nearby wooded area where she was sexually assaulted and killed by the murderer bashing her head in with a rock. Her body was found in a nearby creek bed near First Community Village. Our person of interest is Brent Strutner. There was another person of interest, but it has been requested that his name has been redacted. So for now, we will focus on Brent. Brent is the man who has been convicted of killing Asma. And that's not the only reason why he's our primary suspect. He was jailed in 1980, in the early part of 1981. However, that was simply for assault on a police officer. There are no records of where he was or what he was doing during the second half of 1981. That, and since he was found of murdering Asma Ducat and the similarities between the cases, it's not too hard to speculate that he may have been involved in more than one murder. There's also his age to consider. He would have been 21 at the time. Old enough to be able to lure in Robin, who would have been thrilled to have someone older than her pay attention to her, but also old enough to intimidate Joanne, who, as I said, was a very frightened girl. And if an adult walked up to her and started ordering her around, she probably wouldn't have said no, even if she really should have. The third thing is that Strutner lived in the general area of Robin and Joanne. In fact, we did a quick geographic profile here, and the first two dots in the middle are where Strutner lived and where Asma's body was found. And then you notice up there, that's where Joanne's body was found, and down is where Robin's is found. It's not too hard to speculate that after killing Asma, he decided to go out this way upwards, and then decide to go in the opposite direction for his third kill. However, this is all mere speculation, and there's no way to confirm this, especially since Brent Strutner committed suicide in 1984. Other maps have revealed that there are indeed railroads and interstate highways connecting the murders, indicating that the killer either traveled by railroad track or by car. We face several struggles with the case. Cases go cold for a reason, and found out why. The murders took place over 40 years ago. Technology like DNA testing, even fingerprint testing, was not anywhere near the standard that we have nowadays. That and the police department and coroner's office just wasn't able to give us that much information. In fact, the only real information we got from them was the missing report for Robin Durr that was written up the night that she went missing. The other issue is our group, unfortunately, there were originally 4 members in this group. However, for various reasons, over the past semester, they had to leave the class. I do not blame them though, and I thank them all for their contributions. And just to be honest, there's not enough information to determine what happened to these girls or who killed them. But hopefully that will change, especially since Joanne's case has been reopened. Thank you. Here are the police departments that we work with, and here's where to find us.
Do you have any questions? Anybody have any questions or anything?
Shoot.
So I know you said the coroner led you to the second case, but did the police consider the cases to be linked, or is it just like?
He said there was similarities between the cases, but he didn't necessarily say that they were linked, only that they were similar enough that we would want to take a look at them. Anyone else?
Thank you. Good job.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Noah Lenhart.
I'm Ash.
And I'm Nicholas.
So different from the presentation that you just saw and the presentations that you're going to see in the future, we're kind of going to turn away from looking into one direct case. We had problems with finding information on our case and the fact that it was reopened, so we decided to look into other cases briefly. And we're going to talk about why cases go cold and the prominent reasons, and then we're going to try and link different things that we saw in the cases that we investigated.
As like Noah said, we're looking at 3 cases briefly. These are just 3 cases of the over 10,000 cases that are currently cold in Ohio. Compared to the nation, which is over 250,000 cases that are cold, and that number is only increasing by 6,000 every single year.
Our first case that we're going to go through is the case of Frances Wilk. She's 27 years old and was murdered on December 24th of 2012. She had an apartment in Dayton, and she also had a 3-year-old daughter. She had multiple ongoing disputes with neighbors and other people around her vicinity. There was a shell casing found in her couch in her house or apartment, and other than that, there wasn't much found. There was barely any evidence, and it's a very hard case to find information for.
The next case that we looked into was the case of 16-year-old Jason Knighton. He was murdered September 4th, 2010 in the early evening. He lived in Akron, Ohio, and he was killed in his driveway by gunshot after an altercation while he was unloading groceries.
And our third case was 32-year-old Joshua Starker. He was killed the day after his birthday on February 11th. He was last seen by multiple people quickly leaving to go somewhere. He was later found, at 12:30. He was shot and killed in Vinegar Road in Pomeroy, Ohio.
These cases have a lot in common. They took place in the early 2010s, which means that the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now, and it was hard for people to find information. Social media wasn't as big as it is, again, it isn't as big as it is now, and it's less people that are willing to open up. Most of these incidents happen in a closed area or in a place where there wasn't many witnesses, so we couldn't have asked around to find more information. Also, these deaths were caused by gunshots, and those are very hard to track.
We just want to add a brief disclaimer too. Nothing said in our presentation is not on the police stations in charge of investigating these crimes or the work that they're doing. We're simply just trying to get these stories out and provide information on why these cases are going on.
So kind of moving to our main case, and our original focus is Jeffrey Risner. He was born November 15th, 1955. He was a bigger man, 6 foot, 275 pounds. And our initial thought is the person that took his life had to be a bigger man himself. Jeffrey Risner lived in Palmer Street, Astoria, which is a lower income area, a high population density, a lot of people living in close space with each other, and he was killed March 2nd, 2006.
A little more background information on this case. Jeffrey Risner lived with his ex-girlfriend's grandkids and took them to school every morning. When he didn't appear to do this one morning, people got worried and eventually found him dead in his garage. He was beaten and stabbed to death after a physical altercation with whoever took his life. Police say that there's a good chance it was somebody that he knew due to the location and the timing of the crime. He was killed in his garage, which was disconnected from his house. So there's a good chance that whoever he was talking to or whoever took his life, he had to let into his garage because of the location of it.
There were a couple of roadblocks in our investigation. The first being the police department. Of course, as mentioned before, this was an open case. We couldn't get much information from the department. But they were very considerate at the beginning, and they did try to help us, and we appreciate them very much about it. And not just the police department, but there were others around. There were also neighbors that weren't willing to talk to us. We tried to call a certain person that could be related to the Jeffrey Risner case, and we could barely introduce ourselves before he hung up the call, and we had to figure out another way to get information. This incident also happened in the early 2000s, so there was little to no social media presence of Jeffrey Risner or anyone related to him. He had ongoing familial issues, so that made things worse to contact family members and to figure out what Jeffrey Risner's life was like. We couldn't find any possible place of where he worked, so it was hard to find what his life was like and the people we talked to or hung around with. He may have had a freelance gig from the information that we found, but other than that, we had little to no information.
So after looking at the 3 previous cases and our main case, Jeffrey Risner, we kind of made our prominent reasons why these cases go cold. So the first one being that people are unwilling to talk to police officers, reporters, investigators, simply out of fear, because they fear that if they say something they know about a case, that they could possibly be hurt or worse. There's so many cases currently cold. Like I said previously, there's over 250,000 cases in the nation that are cold and they have no information on them. So it's hard for police departments to reopen these cases and bring light to these cases. Third point is, like I mentioned, they didn't have the technology back then. There's very little media coverage for these police departments to bring light to these cases. Like for our case, we had DNA found at the site, but they couldn't do anything with it. So they didn't have the technology we have today. And our final point is similar to our second, and we were fortunate enough to speak with 2 forensics experts, Cheryl McCollum and Angelina Hartman, and they both said 2 similar things. After the first 48 hours, it's almost impossible to find any information, and the chances drop dramatically to find any information, and for police departments to come back to the crime scene and find anything new.
So then for anybody who's here, anybody that may be watching, you're able to contact this phone number and this email. This is the police department that was in charge of the Jeffrey Risner case, but then also with a quick search, you'd be able to find any information for any of the other cases we talked about. And then, like Mr. Hubbard said earlier, if you didn't want to contact police or anything like that, you are able to contact us at any of these socials or phone number, email. Thank you. Yeah, does anybody have any questions?
How much information were the police willing to share with you? I'm assuming that they did some sort of initial investigation. Were there names of people
So
who they originally talked to?
The first time that we contacted them, they said they were going to talk to us, but the detective that said he was going on vacation. He said he would talk to us when he got back. When he got back, we tried to contact him. We weren't able to get in contact with them. And then when we finally did get in contact with them, he said that the chief they didn't want to talk to us anymore because it was an open case, so we weren't able to get any information from them. All the information that we got was information that we had found online. And, that was it.
Okay, so there's more information there we just couldn't share with them.
part of the problem with that is prosecutors. Prosecutors don't want information to get out because cold cases, they have one shot. If they decide to indict somebody or take somebody to court, they have one shot at it. So they kind of hold them close to their heart until they know for sure they have something. And a lot of times the police officers want help and they like to reach out to the public, but unfortunately the prosecutors kind of hold them back and won't let them do that. So it just depends on the type of case. I did have a question for you guys though. What was the difference between Jeffrey's case and the other ones you brought up there? What was the main difference?
So obviously the main difference was kind of the time period. So Jeffrey Risner's happened about 5 to 10 years earlier. Also, the other 3 cases, they didn't have any like ongoing familial disputes or anything like that, like Jeffrey Risner's. From what we could find, he wasn't in contact with very much of his neighbors or anybody that he was related to. So that was one of the main differences that we found. We looked into his case more than the other 3, so I'm sure if we put as much time into the other 3 cases as we did for his, we'd be able to come up with family members or neighbors or anything like that. But those were really the main differences we saw, like the 5 to 10 year time difference, and then just the familial relationships that Jeffrey Risner had.
I know you said like they found DNA missing. Do you know if like, they ever went back now with the technology we have?
So the first article that we found about the case said that they were going to run forensic genealogy. We attempted to contact the reporter that read up that article, but unfortunately they had retired from when they wrote the article and from when we contacted them. So we weren't, they didn't get back to us or didn't see it, and we weren't able to get in contact with them. So we have no way of really knowing if they ran it or not.
So, one of them, sorry. They're not like me. So one other thing about the 3 you had earlier, I think all 3 of them were shot, right?
Mhm.
And Jeffrey was stabbed and beaten to death.
Yes.
The difference there, why would it be harder in those other 3 cases to find things than it would be with Jeffrey's?
So with Jeffrey's case, it would be a lot easier to find DNA. Like as we said earlier, there was DNA there, and they ran the forensic genealogy, but we don't know the results of that. With gunshots and stuff like that, those don't have. You don't really have to like touch somebody physically or leave any kind of DNA behind. When you're like, I guess, loading up a bullet or anything like that, you don't have to like be touching it that much or anything like that. So there's not going to be much DNA on it. There's not going to be much DNA on the crime scene because you're not getting up close and you're not getting physical with anybody.
Anybody else? Thank you. Nice job.
Okay, first thing we just want to introduce yourself. So I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Gabby, and we'll be talking about Chris Young Sr. Chris was one loved by many. He was a community member, a son, and most importantly, a father. But on one tragic Saturday morning in 2012, Chris was shot, and his family's lives were never the same. The crime. On the morning of Saturday, March 17, 2012, a New Flavor barbershop where Chris worked. At around 9:45 a.m., a couple men came to the barbershop, attacking Chris with a firearm and shooting him several times in his torso.
So next we just wanted to talk about a little bit on the location.
So it was a little bit hard to find information on New Flavor because it's not a current barbershop. It was there in 2012, but it's not now. It's currently Robinson's Corner Cuts. We have a picture of the location, and things around it. Around it's mostly residential, and then it's like kind of like a two-car shop thing. So Springfield itself has a crime rate of 49.61 per 1,000, and in comparison to Ohio's rate of 1 per 297 people experiencing crime, Springfield is 1 per 9. So this makes Springfield safer than only 3% of U.S. cities. So this is just a crime density map of Springfield, and this is a violent crime density map. So you can see in the middle it's more condensed, and we have our like key or legend down at the bottom. You can see as you get further out from Springfield, it gets safer and safer. So where our crime was, it was like around the middle of Springfield, so it's in the darker area.
So before we get into the case itself, we're going to talk a little bit about who Chris was. We got the chance to talk to his daughter, India, and we have a clip of her talking about it.
He was amazing father. He had 10 biological, he has 10 biological kids, and then him and my mom was married, and she had 3 kids before they got together. So that was like 13 that he really, like, because he raised them as his own. So, but he treated everybody like they were kids. Like, we used to have this big old green Suburban because we had so many kids. And like, when we would pull up to like parties and stuff, and we wasn't supposed to be at parties, everybody in Springfield, the kids would run like, oh shoot, y'all dad's here. You know, he fathered like everybody's kid. Like, he was a protector.
So just to reiterate, Chris was not only a father figure to himself, but to the kids of the community. He was known to offer free haircuts to the kids in the community. The bottom picture is when Chris first got his barber license. India said this was her favorite photo of him because, you know, he was so happy and they were also proud of him.
So we just wanted to go into Chris's past a little bit. So he was super athletic, but India touches on that he had a few run-ins with the law when he was younger. But she said that he turned his life around to better himself and to be there for his family. She also mentioned he started going to church and being more active in the community.
He was real into sports. I don't know if you guys kind of looked at his background, but he was all in the papers when he was in high school. He used to go to South High School in Springfield, but he had a jerry curl back, and they tried to tell him that he had a ton of hair, so he left the basketball team. He left and he went to North. He graduated from North because he didn't want to cut his hair, but he wanted to still play basketball. And he had all these scholarships and everything, so he like coached like basketball and.
So just a little disclaimer, we have to acknowledge that most of the information we're about to share comes from the family members of Chris. We are unable to confirm their full validity with officials, but the information that India has shared with us circumstantially checks out with the information we found in existing newspapers and articles. We will be using mostly pseudonyms to protect the victim's family and others involved.
So just starting with the first incident, so from our Dayton Daily News article, we found a Reverend Robert Buford who said that this incident was likely a result of tension that grew from a fight at a bar earlier in the year. So this is referencing something that India told us about. She explained that one of Chris's sons, Ethan, and his cousin Johnny were sitting at a bar. There was another man there, Jordan, who Johnny got into an argument with. Jordan asked Johnny, "You don't like my brother," who's Curtis? And Johnny replied with, "No, I don't like him." So Johnny and Jordan ended up getting into a fight, and Ethan stepped in and defended his cousin, which led to an even bigger fight.
So following the first incident, Ethan had called his older brother, Bruce, to let him know what had happened. Bruce decided he was going to confront Jordan and went to the gas station that he was going to hang out at or be around. Instead of finding Jordan, he speaks with Stephen about his whereabouts. Bruce says something along the lines of, where Jordan at, because I want to know why he's trying to fight my brother when he's much younger than him. Stephen, being Jordan's friends, decided to stick up for him. A physical altercation broke out between Stephen and Bruce, which ended in Stephen having a broken jaw and needing to get it wired.
So how does this all come back to Chris Senior? So Stephen's mother called Chris Senior very upset that Bruce broke her son's jaw. Chris stood up for his kids and responded by asking why her older sons were trying to beat up his young son and nephew.
So there was a second previous incident. Stephen and his friends followed Ethan back to his grandma's house a couple weeks before Chris was murdered. They proceeded to shoot in and outside of the house at Ethan. Ethan's uncle George shot back at the men and ended up shooting them. Just to say, he did have his concealed carry lessons and it was considered self-defense. Chris Sr. called the police to file a report, but no one was arrested or charged. And the police were aware of the previous bar fight and fight at the gas station.
So we just want to give another disclaimer after giving all that information. So we're saying that these incidents may or may not have been the reason for the violence against Chris. We're just simply trying to provide as much information as we can so justice can be served. The only ones truly responsible for his death are those who walked in to take on that morning to take his life.
So a little bit more about the morning of the crime. Chris arrived at the barbershop around 9 a.m. where he usually arrived because he opened. His first appointment wasn't until about 10:30 a.m. So he took a phone call with one of his friends. We got India told us this is information that she's pulled with India. Around 9:45 a.m., still on the phone with his friend, a couple of men walked into the barbershop. He said, hold on, who's this? Rustling noises came over the phone moments later. Then Chris came back on and said, I've just been shot. The friend immediately hung up and called 911.
To call 911. She hung up the phone. She told me, like, I'm going to call 911. So she hung up the phone from him and she called 911. And then she was at work with other people, so they were calling me. So when they called me, I called his phone and he didn't answer. I called my sister because her house was behind the shop, and I called my uncle. My sister called, he didn't answer. And when my uncle called his phone, he did answer his phone. So he did talk to my uncle, but I don't know what he said to my uncle. I don't know, what was talked about. My uncle won't tell us. He just says, I made my brother a promise. That's all he says to us. But on my dad's phone, because I have his phone, he had a certain ringtone for his kids, and it was T.I. Live in the Sky. So I'm thinking, even though he was shot, I'm thinking like when I called and when my sister called, I'm thinking he may have heard the ringtone and he didn't want to answer.
So just to reiterate that he was a family man. He didn't want his kids to see or to hear him the way that he was, so he only answered his brother.
So this is just what happened after the crime. He was still alive when first responders arrived. They life-flighted him to Miami Valley Hospital. He ended up bleeding out during surgery. Contrary to information that we found in newspapers, surgeons told the family that he was shot 5 times in the torso. So the Day-In Daily News article that we found said that he was shot once in the head and once in the torso, but India told us that was not true.
So why is this case cold? The Springfield police explained to the family that they don't have enough concrete and or physical evidence to convict the suspected parties. They explained to India that they are just waiting for someone to talk.
And then if anyone here has any information, or if anyone watching has any information, we urge you to either call this number or email that email address and share with you. And if you're not comfortable doing that, again, you can email us.
Questions?
Was India the only family member willing to speak, or did you try to talk with the brothers or anything?
We talked to India specifically because she was quick to respond to us and she was just like really willing to talk to us. We, I think, messaged other people, but like we were mainly just focused on like India because she was giving us so much information. She was so helpful with us, so we really thank her for that.
We are his daughters.
Yes.
This is the oldest, Krista, Keisha, and I'm Desiree. We're 3 out of the same kids.
You
So-
reached out to me,
Yes.
we all communicated, so we knew that you guys were in contact with India.
So-
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming down. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
We hope that,
Thank you.
somewhere down the road, that you real the case. And I know you have another tragedy in the family not too long ago.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
When you contacted the police department, did they tell you anything or?
Well, they told us that the case was still open when we sent a FOIA request just for like any information we had. So all we got was the initial report, so we didn't know, they weren't able to give us any information.
We also contacted the Clark County coroner, tried to get on talk to her, but we got denied her that fully. We just got no information from them because they said they couldn't do anything to us.
For those of you that don't know, a FOIA request, which they keep mentioning, the Freedom of Information Act, they're a public entity, so we can ask for information. The only thing about police departments and coroners and prosecutors is they have an exemption, 149.43, which says if it's an active and open case, that they can deny giving you something. They have the opportunity, they could give it to you if they wanted to, but they also fall behind the fact that they can exempt for that reason. So that's why they try to do that. Anybody else?
Thank you. Thank you.
Imagine being a kid, just wanted to play with your friends next door. Devin Jennifer was a little girl from New Philadelphia, Ohio, who loved playing outside as a kid. She was murdered in late June of 1998. These are articles from the time that depict different aspects of her murder. This was the biggest case to happen in New Philadelphia, Ohio for a while, so the media put a lot of pressure on the police to get it solved as quickly as possible. When we were coming up to finding cases, we came across Devin on an endless page of news. To our knowledge, her case hadn't been looked at for years. There's been no new information about Devin's case except from what was over 20 plus years ago, and all that information was about the young boy who got arrested for her murder at that time. That story purely focused on Devin hasn't been told in decades until today. Devin was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed 5-year-old little girl that weighed around 40 pounds. She was found in a Tasmanian devil shirt, red shorts, and blue shoes. She's known to be very independent. She was signed up to start gymnastics in the fall and wanted to be a ballerina when she grew up. She always wanted to play with the boys in the neighborhood. She's said to be a happy and spoiled little girl, but had the tendency to wander off. She was stabbed 7 times in the neck, which makes us think, what could this little girl have done that could cause such an act of violence? In order to figure out something like this could have possibly happened to Devin, we went into looking at the family. Her parents were Lori Valentine and Richard Jennifer. At the time of Devin's murder, they were divorced and her father was remarried. Richard Jennifer has been remarried many times, and so Devin has many step siblings. Devin has one direct brother, Dylan Jennifer, who lived with her and her mother in New Philadelphia at the time of the murder. Lori Valentine had moved to New Philadelphia with Devin and Dylan the year prior. They didn't have many friends and were known to be a kind of quiet family. Lori's best friend at the time is said to be Mrs. Harris, the mother of Anthony, the boy that was convicted of murder. In order to understand family dynamics, we built this family tree after we searched up Denver on Ancestry.com. We reached out to family members, specifically the siblings, and none of them wanted to speak. So we don't know clearly what the dynamic was, but we have a little bit of info. Our next step was to create a timeline of events from the time Devin went missing to the time her body was found. We got all this information from court cases and articles that we found. On the morning of June 27th, Devin and Dylan returned from visiting their father for a week in Cambridge, Ohio. At 11:30 a.m., the two siblings were playing outside of their apartment complex. At noon, they tried to go play with a friend in the following apartment complex, but no one was there. At 1:30 p.m., Devin left the house again to try to go see other neighbors they could play. She first went to one neighbor's house, and when they weren't available, she went to another's. At 1:50 p.m., Lori Valentine comes back downstairs from getting ready to go to the grocery store and notices that Devin is missing and begins to look for her. At 2 o'clock, Lori runs into Anthony Harris and pays him $5 to help her look for Devin. At approximately 5:20 p.m., Anthony returns home with helping to look for Devin. At 8:11 p.m., Lori Valentine finally calls the police to report her daughter's disappearance. After that was reported on the night of June 27th, police and volunteers searched for Devin. At 2:30 a.m. on June 28th, the search for Devin was called off. After they had gone back to searching at 2:30 p.m., so 25 hours after she originally went missing, an off-duty EMT finds Devin's body in the woods behind her apartment complex, where it said that searchers had previously looked. Next, we want to discuss the crime scene. So first, the body. Finding information about the body was hard. We sent a FOIA request, which is a Freedom of Information Act, which was denied. On the body, there was no signs of sexual assault, but there were 7 stab wounds to the neck. This partially severed the carotid artery. Her hair and clothes were wet, which is most likely due to the storm the night before. She was infested with insects, which we'll talk about later, and she had no defense wounds. As for potential evidence that was found at the scene, there was only 2 pieces that we could even find. First was a garbage bag. This garbage bag was found near Devin's body, but it was not collected by the police or it wasn't cleaned up. We only found about it through articles. Next was a partial shoe print. Once again, this was not collected by police, and we only found out about it through articles. These were the only 2 pieces of evidence that we even could find. Next, we want to talk about a location. So it said that she was found 100 yards from the apartment complex. So in blue, it's marked where the apartment complex is, and that red circle is the 100-yard radius. The green dot is an approximation of where we think her body was found. She was found in a small bare spot that was densely covered in brush and weeds. There's a path leading to this location that was tunneled out, and it said that children would crawl on their hands and knees in this location. There was no blood surrounding the scene when it was found. So we believe that she was killed in an alternate location and then moved into the woods. Now, next, after many months of researching, we found out that there were some search dogs involved for the search for Devin. These dogs were not from the police, but voluntarily used by an organization. The first dog arrived around 10 p.m. on the night of June 27th. It went to the neighbor's house where Devin was confirmed to have gone, and then went back to the apartment complex, and then went on an elaborate pathway. This elaborate pathway led them to a side entry door near the garage. A second dog went out around 2 a.m., and it followed the exact same pathway. And depending on the speed you walk, this walk would have taken about 45 minutes. And the place the dog led to was connected to a convicted sex offender who recently just got released from prison. Even though it was confirmed that she went to the apartment complex that the dogs went to originally, the dogs were seen to not have been believed after they went on this little elaborate pathway. The only question that we have is why, if her body was in the woods that night, why did the dogs not go there? So we believe that this could have possibly been in the house that Devin was at the time. This was a map that was given to us by one of our resources who wants to remain unnamed. The red line is the approximation of the path that the dogs walked. We do want to note that there is an error in the map. So the dog did not walk through the woods where she was found, and the green dot is the place where she was found. But it's still the approximate line, and then it ends at the top, which is where the house was found. Without the autopsy report, because of our FOIA request being denied, we had to do more information searching. When we found that she was infested with insects, we believed them to be maggots, so we went back to what we learned in forensics and used entomology. The first thing we have to do is figure out the temperature data from the area. On June 27th, the day Devin went missing, it was relatively high temperatures all day between 60 and 70 degrees with rain early in the morning. On June 28th, it was relatively similar temperatures between 70 and 80 degrees with little rain. Now, why does this matter? This helps us determine the type of maggots that were on Devin's body. We believe it is the blue bottlefly maggots because they are native to the Mason region and the New Philadelphia region. These maggots can hatch within 10 hours under hot conditions, which, as we know that they were, and also these flies like to live on dead bodies. So because of this, this narrowed down Devin's time of death to at most 4 a.m. just to give the eggs time to hatch. Now, first we want to take a look at the chart on the right, which is instar. Instar describes the size of the maggots. So as we see, we have second instar highlighted, which means they have about 32 units of energy, which we can see on the chart on the left. Over the 2 days that Devin went missing, they accumulated about 31.7 units of energy, which means they would have been in second instar. And it takes these maggots about 24 hours to reach second instar, which places Devin's time of death between 2 to 4 p.m. on June 27, 1998, just a few hours after she went missing.
This case is still considered to be open, but we want the conversation to start back at the beginning. We are in no way accusing of these people, we just believe they should be spoken to. First, we have Jamie Redmond. This was the name we came across in multiple of the court cases and from newspapers. He's Lori Valentine's ex-boyfriend who was a drug addict and a convicted felon. He lived in the Columbus area, and a year prior, so 1997, he reportedly kidnapped Devin for 3 days. And this is why Lori claims she waited the amount of time she did to call the police. He was court ordered to stay away from Devin after this. Residents of New Philadelphia had reported seeing his car on the 27th, the day Devin went missing. When police pulled over his car in the Columbus area the next day, he said he was visiting a sick family member in New Philadelphia, and they didn't question him any further.
Next is Lloyd Grimes. During a period of stagnant research, I went onto newspapers.com and typed in the name Denver. I looked at the year before Devin's murder and the year after. I got a hit with the year before. Richard Denver, Devin's father, testified in a murder trial against Lloyd Grimes that put him away for life. Now, while Lloyd Grimes was in prison at this time of Devin's murder, it could be a potential revenge motive, but he would have needed someone on the outside to get that done. But it does raise a potential question as to why it would only be one child and not the other. Next is Richard Denver. At the time of Devin's disappearance, he claimed he was in a bar, claiming he was too busy to search for his daughter. It is also important to note that at this time, he was still paying child support for Devin, and that Devin also had a life insurance policy on her.
New Philadelphia says to be a town where something like this never would have happened before, but I wanted to look into see if something like this had, and I came across a similar case with Matthew Baca. He was a convicted murderer in the area for a similar method of stabbing a 17-year-old to death. Next, we have the mysterious man. We have multiple reports of the mysterious man being seen, and we came across this in the ABC 2020 episode that came out of May of last year called Gone Before the Storm. It stated that he has long, curly, light brown hair and is about 5'6". He was wearing a gray flannel that was buttoned all the way up to his neck and all the way down his arms. This is late June in Ohio. It's pretty hot and humid. So it stuck out to the searchers that saw him. This could be connected to Lloyd Grimes, who we talked about earlier, and to us, this is the most realistic person that we have.
And finally is Dylan Dunford. At the time of the murder, Dylan was 8 years old and he wasn't that much bigger than Devin. But at this time, he was also showing psychopathic traits such as killing small animals, and he was also said to be the most likely child to do this by his school's principal. Now, it is unlikely that an 8-year-old would be completely overpower someone of Devin's size, so we believe that if a child like this were to do this, they would need help with someone such as the mysterious man.
We'd like to discuss our challenges that we faced when looking into this case. The first was getting information. Like I said, our FOIA request was denied, so we couldn't get any of the autopsy or any of the police reports. Most of the information that we have is from newspapers and court cases that were given to us in the 2020 episode that we found. Majority of the people that we reached out to didn't want to talk to us either.
Next is Anthony Harris. As we said before, most of this information about this case was on Anthony. Once Anthony got arrested for Devin's murder, all the information went onto him instead of Devin. Even first looking at this case, all we could find are court documents related to Anthony, and the ABC 22 documentary was all about Anthony and his situation.
Next, we struggle finding records. It's still considered an open case, so no one could give us any information. We did reach out to current county prosecutor, whose name is Ryan Steyer, and he says that solving this will require new information, but he doesn't want to strengthen statements that can be made by putting out more information.
And finally, we struggled with where to go. Throughout investigation, we hit many roadblocks and we had many periods of downtime. So we just struggled with articles to find, but unfortunately, as we've said, Devin's case is unlikely to be solved and will will require new information. So if you do have any new information, please contact the Tuscarawas Police Department. The case is reopened, that's why we weren't able to get any information. But if you please know anything, please contact them, either email or the phone.
And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can reach out to us through our email or phone and be able to get the information onto that. And when you do, my name is Lindsay.
And I'm Lydia.
And finally, we would just like to give our thank yous. First, to Mr. Taryn Hale. Mr. Hale was Anthony's lawyer at the time when he got arrested for Devin's murder. Without Mr. Hale, we would not have any close to information that we did find. He sent us many court documents and many articles that gave us some clues as where to go in our research. Thank you. Next, we have Miss Nancy New York. This was a name that we came across in the ABC 2020 episode. She was a searcher at the time and was one of the reports of the mysterious man. We got information of what it was like to be in a search party and how she became across being in it and what the description of this mysterious man was. Next is Miss Nancy Molnar. Miss Molnar was a name given to us by Mr. Hale as a potential source of information. And while she wasn't able to give us much, we still appreciate her willingness to communicate with us. Next, we have Sheriff Orvis Campbell. He wasn't able to release anything to us due to it being an open case, but again, we appreciate his response. Next is Mr. Ryan Steyer. As we've said, Mr. Steyer is the prosecutor for Tuscarawas County. And again, he wasn't able to give us any information, but we still appreciate his willingness to respond to us. And next, we have Stacey Allard, who is a forensic pathologist that helped our class, and she helped us open up different leads that we hadn't looked at before and hadn't thought of. And next, we wanted to say thank you to Mr. Hubbard. He helped us every step of the way because there's a lot of confusing terminology that we didn't understand, and he was able to help us, answered our countless questions that we had, and gave us multiple copies to get Devin's story back out there. And thank you to all of you for listening to our presentation, and we're now open for questions.
So the crime scene, what was the reason you thought the body was moved there?
There's no blood at the scene, and I'm in anatomy class, so when you get stabbed in the carotid artery, and even if it's slightly severed, it will spurt everywhere because it's highly pressurized. So when her body was found, there was no blood on the scene. We thought that was very confusing, especially if the carotid artery would have been punctured. And searchers have already looked in the area where her body was later found. One of the searchers even said that like 10 minutes later, her body was found in an area they were sure they already covered.
Any theories as to why the evidence that was there that you noted, the footprint and the garbage bag, weren't actually collected as evidence?
So once Anthony was arrested for Devin's murder, the police stopped looking at any other suspects. Anthony was arrested maybe about 1 week after Devin's murder, so once he got arrested, they only focused on him and they didn't even bother looking at all the other evidence because they were sure they had their suspect. He later appealed and was let out 2 years later, so obviously the evidence they didn't collect could have been some help as to this case is open now, but they were sure they had their suspect, so they did not look at the other evidence. And it was said like nothing like this would have happened, and I think like the chief of police had been there for 18 years and had one murder that he investigated in that time. So they were very like under knowledge on what would happen to the murder case, especially if one of the families.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin Blaylock.
I'm Melanie.
And I'm Baden.
And we're going to talk about a great student who went to Kent State back in May 24th, 1978. Her name was Judy Martins, and it was right before spring break that she just was going to have a great time going to a nice party just right as she was leaving. And she didn't really tell her friends what she was doing, and she decided to go back to her college dorm alone, which talk to everyone. We have no idea why she did that because she's normally with people all the time. And while walking to her home from Dunbar Hall to Eagleman Hall, it was a roughly 5-minute walk around like 2 in the morning. So there's not really a lot of witnesses walking around at 2 in the morning, obviously. And when she reached her hall, she disappeared without a trace. When we looked into what evidence was left, there was nothing. It was all normal. There was a coffee burning in her apartment as well. And ever since then, the case has been unsolved and it's been open for a while. And whilst
when she went missing, the day after that she went missing from the university, that's when her parents had initially called the police and filed that missing persons report. They did have searches, they didn't find anything, there was no witnesses, no evidence, no body. And not long after that search had concluded, they actually destroyed the file, the Kent State University police.
Yeah, and this is roughly the walk path she took, which maybe she probably disappeared roughly walking around the grass path, or maybe just at the beginning or the very end. And that's roughly the area where she walked and all that.
Okay, Judy was a 22-year-old woman that lived by herself. She was a great student, a great family person, and a good people person. And last time she was seen, she had a lot of people.
So we talked to one of her friends back then, her husband and her wife, Mary Sprinowski, and during that time, they were just, she had a boyfriend who was working for the ROTC back then, and since it wasn't a very popular thing because of Vietnam, and her boyfriend thought that he could destroy the military from the inside out because he was in the ROTC, and he was able to fly his plane because he had a pilot's license. And so her husband and her talked to a psychiatric person, and they thought that since he was in the ROTC, they flew her over and just pushed her out of the plane, and that would have what killed her. That's kind of a crazy theory, considering that. And as well,
We tried to talk to the actual the police department that's in the area, not just the police department that's of the university, and they responded and they didn't give us any information. We reached out to her sister, and we actually couldn't find her brother. We couldn't find him on any obituaries, on social media. There was nothing. It's almost like he didn't exist. But the sister did not reach out to us. The only person that actually did reach out was Mary.
and both her parents were sadly passed away way before then. So another thing that she talked about with us was how her ex-boyfriend was related in drug trade. And back then, there was this gang called Hell's Angels who was around Cleveland, Ohio at the time. And they're always around Cleveland, Ohio now. So they had a party, which they would bring the drug dealers that they were with, and the drug dealers would bring their girlfriends with them. And considering that, maybe Judy thought something was shady, and she tried to talk to someone, and maybe just talk to the wrong person, and then maybe she's just caught at the wrong time, and then while she was alone, they found out where she was and just took her away. And they were also involved in some human trafficking and slavery.
As we said before, she had a boyfriend that was potentially involved into gangs. So we had a theory that maybe she had been trafficked. Typically, children and women are trafficked, and a lot of them are missing every year. And the type of people who really do trafficking are pimps and gang members. So it kind of fits the idea that maybe her ex-boyfriend had actually done some of this. We don't know for sure, but it's a possibility. Another thing is maybe she ran away herself. Maybe she went to another country and just started a new one. Now, people who actually do this are people who are seeking refuge from abusers, and the people who actually go missing are people with mental illness, disabilities, and children. Unfortunately, she didn't fit any of these profiles. She was a good student. She was the head of her dorm, and she was good with people. So it wouldn't really make all that much sense for her to just uproot her life and go away.
We have a red week theory because last time she was seen, she had a red week on, and October 11th, 1970, the body of a 23-year-old woman was found in a cornfield in that county. and I went through this time.
And also, if it seems like the dates are pretty spread out, it could mean because killers normally have motives, and sometimes they just like to take breaks after a while or just disappear and just leave nothing. And then sometimes they can just spring out and just kill again.
We didn't really get much information from the people that we talked to. So we're reaching out to all these other people. This is where you could find us. We don't have any other information, or we can't give out the information of all the other people. But that's all we really got. We didn't really get anything from many people. They didn't reach out, but they didn't reach out back to us. This is all we really have. But does anyone have any questions?
You talked about the coffee still brewing in the dorm room. What does that say about when she left the party? Where did she end up going?
I think when we were talking to Mary, she was talking about how she was leaving to go grab something. So we don't really know why there was coffee brewing. We couldn't really find anything about that. Yeah.
Well, if it's still brewing, who probably put it on there?
It probably was, she probably didn't disappear around 2 a.m. She probably just stayed in her dorm without really talking to anyone. And maybe she was thinking of brewing coffee around that time. So maybe she was taken around there just so she could like stay awake for the party maybe.
Think about this, why would she leave that, why would she walk out of her room, especially a dorm room? Why would she walk out of her room with something like that still on? Somebody possibly did what?
She could, someone probably snuck in, or another possibility, she made it in thinking that she might have not stayed at a party too long. That is a possibility.
Anybody else?
Was there any witnesses or anybody that you guys talked to, or?
We tried reaching out most of the time, but sometimes they just wouldn't answer our messages we gave to them. But Mary, there was really no witnesses really, because I'm assuming since there was a party, everyone was either there or just in their dorms just hanging out, because it was right before spring break.
Yeah, most of these people were going home, so not many kids were still on campus. The ones that were probably partying at the time. So the original pistol actually didn't say that there was any witnesses. She provided what we found. So it didn't really give us much to go off.
Isn't it unusual that the university police destroys a file?
Yeah.
Do you know anything more about that, or whether that's typical, or?
It's not, and I think you actually have to have court, like, you have to get it by a judge to actually destroy the file. You can't just delete it or get rid of it. It has to stay there unless you have approval from the court.
Yeah, we did really think that was weird though, because even her family members were weirded out by it, because they were kind of angry about it as well. Because they were the only ones that really had any evidence, but we couldn't reach out to them because we couldn't find anything, and we just didn't get contacted back.
You got a question?
Yeah, who reported her missing?
Her parents.
Her parents?
Yes.
Were they like having her from home?
Yes.
Or did she just did it?
She did. Anyone else?
Was anyone from the campus police, was anyone ever questioned of why they destroyed
No.
all the evidence they received?
No. It was nothing. It was, I personally, I would have questioned it, but no, nothing.
Good job.
All right, so our case is on the murder of Heidi Bake. My name is Grant.
I'm Peyton.
I'm Bradley.
Sam.
And I'm Bernice.
So the first stage of our investigation this is the first stage of our investigation with the girl. So the victims of the shooting were Heidi Bake, who was a 42-year-old woman living in Coleraine Township. And then the other victim was Antoine Little, who was 30 at the time of the crime and also lived with Heidi.
The night of the murder. On June 11th, 2010, around 2 a.m., three men in masks broke into the home of Heidi Bake and Antoine Little. The intruders pulled Antoine and Heidi out of their bed asking for money, which then during this time, Antoine was shot in the leg and Heidi was shot in the back of the head.
So just some background on the crime. At the time of her death, Antoine was a drug dealer. And the night before the crime, he had actually gotten a mysterious call from someone he didn't know asking to buy drugs. But he turned them down and said he'd be able to help them in the morning. And he actually claimed that during the break-in, he was wrestling with one of the suspects and they had the gun to his head, but it didn't go off.
So some of the initial police observations were that police responded to this call around 2:20 in the morning. They were actually responding to a robbery about 2 doors down, heard multiple gunshots, turned around and went back to look. What's strange about this is that the neighbors said they heard no gunshots, so it's kind of interesting that the police heard them from 2 doors down, but the neighbors heard nothing. And then it was said that 3 men had broken into the home for Antoine and Heidi, but when the police were there, they had seen no one leave. And then one of the names was found. It was Brian. He was suspected to be involved in breaking into the home, but he went by a street name Dino.
So the next day after the incident, breaking at the house, Antoine and Heidi were both hospitalized, and while Antoine administered survived his injury to the gunshot to his leg, Heidi ended up putting up a fight while she was on life support, but eventually her organs gave out, and she passed away on June 12th, 2010 at the age of 30.
So we want to talk about who was Heidi as a person, and we better talk about it than her mom.
She was known for the most witty and the most boisterous. She was not the most wonderful talker, but she always had an opinion, and she was always, you always knew she was in the class, always. Because, well, in the first place, she kind of stood out. She was 6 feet tall, that's blonde, blue eyes, and she's very strong. And she was very outgoing, was very close to talk to everybody. You know, if there was something that happened, she was probably going to do that. There was something going on in the class with something.
Heidi was a middle child of 3 who grew up in a rural farm in Edgewood, Ohio. Heidi was very intelligent and charismatic as she was growing up, and she was known for being very outgoing and a very nice, kind person.
This is just some more general information about Heidi. So she was around 6 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. Also, around the time of her death, she had a daughter named Lindsay. She was 21 at the time.
So one of the interesting things about this case is that Heidi actually had a severe brain injury when she was in 7th grade. She fell down the stairs and was hospitalized, and the doctors noticed that there had been damage done to her frontal lobe, and they claimed that after she recovered, there would be differences in her personality, and she would likely have impaired decision-making. And unfortunately, they were correct, and friends and family after the incident said that Heidi's demeanor changed. She made different decisions than she did prior, although she was still friendly and outgoing.
So despite Heidi's injury, she was still able to find success in her life. She had gone down to Florida for a little bit. She even got married in Florida, which ties back to her injury, to she had injured her frontal lobe. So that was a sense of her impulsiveness. But we were told that while she was in Florida, she did attend college. We're not sure where or if she graduated, but that she did go.
So over the course of the school year, we spent time trying to find information and picking it out. And so we kind of took it into like 3 different phases. So the first phase of our investigation was like searching the internet. The second one was talking to family and friends, and the third was talking to the police.
So as Peyton said, phase one was searching the internet to find a base level of information. So we used a lot of news clippings and different articles that we found to get a base level to move forward with. We also were able to find a lot of family members that she had, and we were able to contact these and start to get a level of information to start getting them online.
Our second phase was communicating with family, friends, anyone close to Heidi at this time. So we were only able to contact her sister, her brother, and her mother. And out of those 3, the one that gave the most information was her mother. She actually came in during our class to get this information.
Our third and final phase of collecting information was trying to get in contact with the police. So unfortunately, this case is still technically open, so they weren't able to give us as much as they maybe would have. But we were actually able to get the initial incident report, which listed the victims and the suspects of the crime. We did file a FOIA request, but we never heard back, likely due to this case still being open.
So our conclusion, we unfortunately were able to find any new suspects as we had trouble contacting the police. And then some information that we were given actually contradicted information that we had found on the internet, but we do hope that this case gets solved one day.
So we had many conflicting pieces of information which we used to cross-check each other to try to find out what actually happened. For example, the police started hearing gunshots muffled from 3 doors down when they arrived on the scene for a different crime. And so, but when they went over to actually look, we had direct family members tell us that they actually saw a getaway driver and they got him, and his name was Brian Ordino, but the police report never said anything along the lines of that.
And so if you have any information that you'd like to share with us, you can go to our information or call any police department.
Well, that'll take questions.
So it's the fact that they did not see anybody leave the house.
Yeah, so the police said that they heard muffled gunshots as they were arriving on scene, but they didn't say they saw anybody leave the house. But it does contradict what we heard about a getaway driver that drove away the 3 suspects. So that's why it was kind of hard to come to a conclusion, because we had a lot of information that just didn't add up, didn't make sense.
So the information about the getaway driver, the 3 people, who gave that information?
Donna gave us that information, which was Heidi's mother at the time. So the police report didn't say anything about this, but Donna's mother said that the police gave her a slip of paper that had the name of the getaway driver that they apparently took into questioning, but no one's ever arrested or charged with any crime.
So the mom told you about it, but who actually would have seen the getaway? Did the family live close?
The police would have had to see the getaway, but the police report said nothing about it. So, but it got passed around between multiple police departments, so it might have gotten lost in translation.
But no family members lived in the apartment complex or near
It was just Heidi and her boyfriend.
Heidi and her boyfriend, and the neighbors claimed they never heard anything.
Yeah.
So her boyfriend, did you guys get any information from him or like the police since he survived?
We were unable to contact her boyfriend.
Yeah, we were not able to get in contact with her boyfriend at the time. We only contacted Heidi's mother and a few of her siblings.
Now, one of the reasons we did not get hold of the boyfriend is that obviously he had a questionable past. He was shot in the leg where she was shot in the back of the head when he was the drug dealer. So it just seemed kind of strange. And we thought it might not have been a good idea to try to talk to him. Now, he did get on the news and talk about the case, which is kind of strange in itself. But he got on the news and talked about it and all that kind of stuff. Supposedly he has straightened out his life now, but I didn't think it would be a good idea for them to question him. Thank you, good job.
Imagine a nice night in the middle of the summer. You start to travel home on a path you've taken many times before. However, tragedy falls and you never make it home. This is the story of Ernestine Hurd. So Ernestine grew up in a small town in Arkansas with her family and later moved to Cincinnati to get a fresh start. She worked for a cleaning company within P&G and would normally get out around 11 p.m. She was said to be a loving and caring grandmother, wife, sister, and friend. And she would never be walking home alone since she did work with her daughter or her husband would come and pick them up and take them home.
So while we were looking into different cases that we could have put to research, we decided to pick this one because we saw a Facebook page that was dedicated to her that was made by her granddaughter Mariah. And when we looked into it further, we realized it didn't have much attention over the years, and we wanted to see how it had changed over the last 4 decades, as well as the fact that it's a central piece of Cincinnati, so it would be easier for us to look into it.
The night was June 24th, 1982. While it was laid out at around 11:30 p.m., it wasn't notably later than the normal time that Ernestine would be walking around and getting home. In fact, the only factor making this night different from any other was the fact that she was by herself. Usually, she had her daughter accompany her, whom she worked with, and sometimes her husband would also make the trip out to ensure his family's safe arrival home. However, on this night, Ernestine found herself alone. Before she was able to board her bus, she was attacked and stabbed twice in her chest before her attacker fled and an ambulance was called. Despite a bystander being close enough to hear her screams, rush over and call the EMTs, there were no eyewitnesses to the actual attack itself, and her attacker was able to escape unseen. The EMTs fled to the scene, and she was rushed to the hospital, where she then died. Nothing was taken off her person, and her attacker was never seen or contacted.
So there are a few different important people to this case. Mariah was her granddaughter, who I mentioned earlier, and she lived with her. And we spoke with her about the case, but she was pretty young when it happened, so she didn't remember much about when it occurred. Then we had Tom Stryker, who was the main detective that worked on the case. However, he has since retired, so we were not able to talk to him. But we did talk to Jessica Schmidt, who's a reporter who covered the case again last summer, and she was able to give us insight about talking to the family and how it was covering the case publicly. And then we have Larry, who was Mariah's uncle and Ernestine's son, who was known to be a local informant for drug deals and crime in the area. So that could have been a possible motive. And finally, there were potential witnesses such as painters and on 6th Street, but there's no evidence of this.
So while we were going through this case, we realized that location played a big key in our investigation, since downtown Cincinnati has recognized new buildings and streets that made it easier for us to trace it. So we start around the P&G building, which is still there today, and that's where she would work the night shift, as we said earlier, and she would go out around 11. With that, everything else mainly happened around 6th and Main Street. And then she was also supposed to meet with her supervisor after her shift at the White Castle nearby. The supervisor never showed up, so she started to make her way to the bus stop to head home. She was approached before the bus stop and later taken to the hospital, which is where she died. She also lived in Priceville, which isn't too far away from the area, but it's still dangerous to get home by yourself.
So there were a few different theories about what may have happened. As we said, Ernestine's son was known to be an informant for drug deals and local crime, so there could have been a motive for revenge, but for him to kill his mother, but we don't think this is very likely to be the nature of the crime.
There's also a possible link to a stabbing that happened in a department store nearby, but we did not investigate that very closely. Then there's also the fact that she had recently beat out her coworker for promotion, and that could have been revenge motivated as well. But the main theory that we looked into is that she was known to be having an affair with possibly her supervisor, which means that she had been anyone upset over that, which could be his wife, him, her husband, or anyone like that. As well as the fact that it was a stabbing, so it was very personal and not like a shooting or anything like that. It was also not, the person who did it wasn't experienced because she did not die in the scene. And it was also, it was revenge motivated because she was taking away all her stuff was still on her purse from running her home.
While researching this case, we encountered many roadblocks that hindered us or set us back a bit. The biggest hindrance to our research is the fact that this case happened so many years ago, so that we weren't able to find many people to contact. The people that we would have been able to contact either passed away or too young at the time of the crime to have much reliable information, or too old now that they have faint memories or not much information. Another complication with this case is the fact that there were no actual eyewitnesses to the attack itself, so that there were no descriptions of the attacker to give to the detectives or for us to find online. As well as not being able to find any witnesses to contact, we are unable to find records of anyone she worked with, which limits the people who know her and her after work habits, which could have told us if there was anything different or off about what she was doing at work that night or after work that night. That means we were also unable to find her supervisor, who she was having an affair with, or her coworker, who she recently beat out for a promotion. When contacting the police, we sent a FOIA request to see if we could access the case file to see if they had any more information that we were not able to find out through articles online. Unfortunately, this case file had been misplaced, so we are unable at this time to take a look at that. However, if it gets located anytime in the future, we hope that it gets taken another look at. We also sent a FOIA to the coroner's office for access to the autopsy report to see if she had any defensive wounds or struggle marks on her body, which could have told us more about the attack itself, as well as how the attacker approached her and how deep her wounds in her chest actually were, which again could have told us more about her attacker and how experienced he or she was. However, this request was also unfortunately denied. And we were trying to find out any and all information we could, but unfortunately, there are just not much that we could find out.
So our process for knowing about this case started by finding a Facebook page with a simple Google search of just Ernestine's name that her granddaughter Mariah created back in the summer of 2021. We also later found Jessica Schmidt, who's a reporter who did coverage on the case a couple years back as well, and she gave some more insight onto what we might not have been able to find elsewhere. And we also looked at paths she could have taken on her way home on other nights after work with her daughter or with her husband, or how else she would have gotten home. We also used Ancestry.com and other family-facing websites to find if there were any more relatives, friends, or people that just could have known her and lived near her. We also took a deeper look into what theories we've heard from just the few people we've talked to, and we also got to build on that with the videos and phone calls that we have had throughout the year. There are also some articles that we found that show that there were stabbings and similar incidents that happened around the area that could have been linked to Ernestine's case, that could have been done by the same person or the same group of people. Even though we hit a few walls throughout our investigation, we had enough to build on what we've seen and make us on what could have happened that night.
We want to say thank you to everyone that we were able to contact and talk to during this time, including Mariah and Jessica Schmidt. And here's the information for the Cincinnati Police Department if anyone has any information at all regarding this attack. If you're unable or afraid to speak to the Cincinnati Police Department, here's our information. I'm Emily. And we thank you for listening to our presentation. Any questions?
fact that she was stabbed in the front, in the chest, you kind of mentioned it, but what does that tell you about her and her attacker's relationship?
She likely knows her attacker and allowed them to get close enough to her to be able to stab her in her chest without that we know of any other wounds in her body that would have hindered her or made her slow down enough for him or her to get close enough to Ernestine. However, without the autopsy report, we're not able to find out if she has any more wounds anywhere else in her body, including defensive wounds.
I got another one. So, you had also mentioned that normally she was either picked up by her husband or was with her daughter. Out of all the people that you do know about, who would have known she would have been by herself?
Her husband or anyone she was working with that night, if she happened to be talking about how her daughter was not working or how her husband was not able to pick her up that night.
Do we know if anybody else that was working with her knew what path she would take?
Not necessarily, unless they would get off at the same time and walk similar paths or take similar bus routes.
Anybody else?
You said she was supposed to meet her supervisor, the one she was presumably having an affair with?
Yes.
But the supervisor never showed up?
Yes.
Leaving her by herself?
Yes.
Is there ever any connection there as a possible suspect?
He is, in our mind, considered a person of interest that we would like to speak to if given the possibility. However, we're not able to label anyone as suspects, and we were never able to find any names or any cases to connect to him. But we would like to speak to him if given a chance, just to find out maybe why he didn't meet up with her that night, or if anyone else knew about the affair. We've read about that in a few articles. Obviously, that's not the most reliable source of information, but on a call with Mariah, who is Ernestine's granddaughter, she confirmed that for us. We didn't really ask how she knew it, but she was very confident in the fact that she was on her supervisor.
I will say, the Cincinnati Police Department has actually this year been really helpful. Previous years, they've changed people who are in charge now. Previous years, they used the FOIA 149.43. This year, Detective Kelly has actually allowed us to look at 2 case files. This one, unfortunately, when we asked about it, she said somebody checked it out and they have no idea where it is. It is from 1980s, it was 1982. Unfortunately, the filing methods and things like that from 1980s is a lot different than what it is now, so they're having trouble finding that one.
How long can the statute of limitations, when they claim that a case is open and it's 25 years old and it's clearly not being worked, can they claim that it's being worked on so they don't have to adhere to the FOIA?
They can do it forever. Right now, the state, there is a bill that's supposedly going through the state soon. And they're trying to get another one, which that might be a project that my class might work on next year. About after 10 years that the cases should be given to outside sources. Right now, they can claim that forever because there's no statute of limitation on murder. So there's no statute of limitation on it's an open case. The older the case, the more they tend to be open with it. Unfortunately, this one they lost. So, anything else? Anybody? Thank you. Good job. Well, one thing I want to say is thank you to everybody that came, including students from the friends of the class, even though they know we get extra credit. But we thank everybody for coming. The students have done a lot of hard work. Unfortunately, we have run into the same things that the police department run into. People don't want to talk. A lot of them, they're older cases, and many people are no longer with us. Police departments don't want to give out too much information, which is understandable in some situations. Unfortunately, when you have a case that's 40-some years old, or some of those other ones you're not sure what they're holding on to at that point. But, we appreciate the fact that at least they're getting an opportunity to try to work around those things. It gives them a real life experience if they were to do this as a job, they're gonna run into the same issues. Hopefully with new technology and DNA and things like that, genealogy, that maybe some of these cases will get looked at again. Unfortunately, as they mentioned in theirs, these cases, there's 250,000, they're going up by nearly 6,000 a year. The actual rate of solving cases used to be about 80%. Now it's down to about 55, 60%. And the problem is crimes are becoming less personal. So the individuals are not getting close to people anymore. And then all those cases are going unsolved. We thank you again. Thank you for coming this evening. We're going to do this again tomorrow. We have 7 more cases tomorrow. And the live stream is out there if anybody wants to watch it. Anybody that's out there on the live stream, if you have any information on any of these cases, please contact those local police departments or contact us, and we'll get you in touch with them. Thank you again. Have a great evening. Thank you.